Hey everyone, this is Duncan. In this next clip, I'm going to be doing the commentary, but the fraps is from the footage of Will Adama and his active Drake. The fight happens in M-O, entry system into tribute, but before the fight happens, we were just messing around on the station with a few people, 2 or 3. Not much was happening though, so we went back to the low-sec system to AZ. We had a neutral Drake with us, however, and he decided to stay behind. And he was able to kick things off, actually. And since he was by himself and local, with us not there, the people living there decided to go for him. At the start, we weren't too organized, but we were still on comms, and we were still, able to form really quickly. And he lets us know that there are a couple ships coming to the gate, wanting to engage him. I tell him if he's able to keep them interested and keen and to actually burn off, and then that we would be right there. Basically, by telling him to start without us is for them, seeing a neutral, not making the connection directly with us. Neutrals can sometimes be really good for kicking fights off by sort of acting as, bait, where people think that they're just going to get a gank, and it turns out into a fight, and they might not be prepared for that, and it puts them on the back foot a little bit because they're not expecting it. So the reason we want him to burn off instead of just sitting on the gate, tanking and jumping out, is that separating people is generally always a good thing. If he just sat on the gate, tanked and jumped out, this sort of would have kept them in the same spot where they could similarly do the same, and we didn't want them de-aggressing or jumping or warping off if they weren't pointed. And we wanted the fight to move off the gate with the Drake and put them in a position where they've committed a bit more and want to stay and continue fighting. So he burns off the gate, and as he burns off the gate, we start coming in. At first it's just myself and Tornado and Will and the Drake, as well as another Talos. We see a Blackbird, and that's obvious for his primary. It can take a couple of us out of the fight from locking wise, and that can be huge. Unfortunately, we don't point them in time, and he warps off, and he comes back more than once in the fight, and is a pretty heroic Blackbird. He kept coming back. There are 3 Hurricanes on the field. 2 of them are really close to us. We can point those, so we go for those, and that's what we focus on. The Hurricanes closest to us are best for us to shoot because we're going to be doing the most damage to them, and like I said, we can tackle them. We ask the Drake if he's alright. He says he's okay. It turns out he's not actually okay, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Second Hurricane goes down. We're able to do a lot more damage. We can project damage much better in our ships than Hurricanes can. Some of us are in ships that aren't useful, like on a Harpy and not in Fleet, but that doesn't matter. We sort that out later. We kill the 3rd Hurricane, and Will gets a web on this Tengu. Putting webs on 100 MN, Tengus, which are often 100 MN fit, is usually a good idea, because it's basically the only real tackle that actually works. Unfortunately, our Drake goes down at this point. We thought he was okay. He said everything was fine when we asked, but he didn't really communicate his actual situation to us. Perhaps we should have had him on watch list, so that was a mistake on our end as well. But it's a really good example of why communication is so important in fleets, because in fleets this size anyway, because if he had told us, we would have focused on the ships shooting him, more so than the ships further away that weren't really doing damage to him, and we probably would have been able to maybe save him, or at least get him in a position where he was perhaps able to warp off and get out, and we could continue without having any losses that we possibly could have avoided. But he unfortunately goes down, and we kill the other Drake instead and hold this Tengu. Sometimes it's tempting to finish everything off and just end the fight right away and just keep killing until there's nothing there and then loot. But when you have a high value target, it's often good to just, if you're in a commanding position, just to hold it, especially if the targets are in a system like this where you know they can reship easily and come back. Just to keep sort of the fight going and escalate it if you can, and make them think that the fight is still happening, where they just keep coming in maybe one by one, or even, all together. And you can always use a scan for that. And that's why it's important to have your scan open, so not just for situations like this, but for situations like this, so you can see when people are coming in and just be prepared to Either keep the bait there if you can handle what's going to come in, or be ready to finish the bait off and continue the fight with targets that come in. And you'll notice that we keep the Tengu in low shields in case something that comes in is able to rep this Tengu back up. We'll know about it and we'll be able to kill it. You'll see a Scimitar, for example, come in, but there's only, one Scimitar. He can rep the Tengu, but no one can really rep him, so it's not too big of a deal. And we can hold tackle on the Tengu and kill the Scimitar. And we hold the Tengu, keep the webs on him and tackle. You can see the Blackbird that came in from before comes back in. We almost kill him, but he manages to escape us a second time. We're still watching scan at this point, putting the Tengu back in those shields. Nothing too scary has come in yet, so we're not too worried. But then a Thanatos comes on scan. We don't know where he's going to land. We don't know whether he's going to enter triage right away. So it's best to just finish this Tengu off, and it's fine because we have another escalation target in the Thanatos anyway, so it's not really a problem. So as this Tengu goes down, we're looking to see what to go for next, and we don't notice that this Thanatos is in triage because he still has velocity, and he goes into triage for 5 minutes, so we know he's there for at least 5 minute cycle, and he's at speed, I think, because of him hitting triage immediately after coming out of warp. His mass keeps him moving a little bit before he slows down. We primary a Drake right after, not knowing that he had entered it, and you can see how quickly he reps the Drake back up. So we switch quickly to a Naga. It has a lot less HP, and we can sort of alpha through the shields into armor and kill it, even with the triage there. Even if the Naga was in rep range of the carrier, we could probably kill it through the reps, just because of how little shields it has and how much damage we have on the field in terms of T3 VCs and even the battleship. As an example of how much damage we do, you can see how that rapier that decloaked just completely melted. And then after this rapier that we kill, we try to shoot this Hugin, and since he has webs, he can keep us from moving. It's a pretty dangerous target. And we can't really, get it past even like 80-90% shields. We see an Oracle go to a bounce. We have probes on grid. We get everyone to pull in our drones and point their ships in that direction as we run a scan. And we just get warped up to this Oracle. We can't do too much about the stuff on grid because it's, heavily tanked ships, even the Hugin, being repped by a triage Thani. We warp up to this Oracle. He's not really too prepared for it. But it's always important to be ready to change what you're doing based on the situation and basically kill what you can. And I don't think this Oracle really expected it, just because we were sort of engaged on the gate and he thought perhaps he was safe. At this point we're a little bit scared of going in too close to the carrier because we're not confident that we can kill the things that it can rep and all those support ships beside it. And we know that they have a Hugin. And if the Hugin gets webs on us, and they can easily point us, and then we can't manage range. And with all of us besides Will and buffer tank ships, it'd pretty much be, game over for any ship that gets caught within web range. However, this Hugin is actually a little over tanked with only a single web, and one of us gets actually caught, but is able to, MWD out because they're a bit more stationary than we are, all sort of staying around the carrier. At this point, we just try to kill the ECM drones while we sort of wait for the situation to change a little bit, hang around, we're just mostly thinking about what we can try to do here, because that Thanatos can rep everything there, and we're not really going to break the Thanatos. We're actually more interested in removing the support ships from the field before we actually try. Although some tier 3 BCs come in, and we know that we can probably kill those under carrier reps with as much damage as we have. But we can't just burn in and start shooting him from deep fall off until we get into optimal, because they'll see what we're doing from miles away and they can react to it with either the tornado warping off before we get into point range, or the carrier focusing reps and staggering the reps on him. You can see how well they're tanking, because when we shoot the Hugin, we're barely even scratching him, even though we have lots of hefty damage dealing ships on the field. So right now we're waiting for our probes to be set up. We had them right away for that Oracle, but unfortunately, they had gone down and expired in the meantime while we were fighting. So as our probe ship warps off and comes back and drops them, everyone's moving out of range and aligning back towards them, so we can warp straight to this tornado and just put maximum damage right away and try to sort of kill him before they realize what's going on and before the carrier can land reps and stagger them on him. If you care about people seeing whether you have probes or not, it's usually good to, leave the grid and then drop them so it's not as obvious. But in this case, it didn't really matter, and they could have been dropped off on grid, but our probe ship had already warped off to drop them off grid. But it doesn't really matter in this case. So we get the warp, and we land right on top of the tornado. We're locking it up as we're burning, and we're overloading our damage and moving away and overloading per cycle so we can get the speed right away. He gets him all the way back up this triage carrier, but you notice we're volleying through his shields, and we're able to kill him. We switch to this Hugin as we burn off, and you can see how little damage we're doing to it. With as fast as we kill the other tornado, you can tell that this Hugin is pretty well tanked. And the Drakes, they have a resist bonus and extenders and invols and things like that, so they're also really well tanked. But I think the carrier exits its cycle at this point as he starts moving. And with him out of the cycle, we have a much better chance of trying to kill ships like this Hugin or the tornado that just gets away from us before we're able to kill it, as you can see here. And at the same time, we get a scimitar on grid. The Drake reshipped to a scimitar, the one that died on our side, is now back in a scimitar. And this allows us to be much more aggressive and much more committal, because we can probably tank damage now much better than we could before. We were just all buffer, besides those Drake, of course. So at this point, we're trying to move in, try to put pressure on the Hugin, and possibly also tackle this Thanatos now that he's out of triage, but we're not quite able to do that, and he wisely decides to warp off, staying on grid with the triage carrier with not much support, and is not generally a very good idea. So him getting out as soon as he can is, once the cycle's over, is pretty good by him, and we're not able to point him in time, but we do get a consolation Drake instead, as they all leave the grid. And it's not too bad. We couldn't break anything as it was. We probably would have had to do some very quick target switching, maybe overwhelm one of the tanks before he could switch reps or something like that. But we managed to grab this Drake, and this is pretty much where the fight ends. We weren't able to escalate off the Thanatos as well as we could have, and that was probably our biggest mistake, not pointing the Thanatos. We couldn't do too much about the situation as it was, but just keeping things there allows the situation to maybe change. Maybe we can get someone with newts on, or get someone to reship into newts, or something like that. Or maybe, they bring more ships that we can kill that aren't just tank. Just waiting for the situation to change can always happen. But we end the fight, and it goes pretty well. For losing a single Drake, we kill about 15 of their ships, and this basically just shows how you can escalate fights and keep the fight going when it should have ended.